Okay. So welcome everybody. Take a seat. You can take the cup to your seat and continue the coffee. So we start. So my name is Ivonne. I'm working at the German Climate Computing Center in Hamburg in Germany, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the FDO Forum, one of the FDO Forum working groups. And I'm leading you through this session today. I would like to, could all the speakers raise their hands that I just had an impression that everybody's here? Good. It's enough arms, probably too many, but I only need 6. Um, you have actually 10 minutes. After 9 or 10 minutes, I will stand up, and you know that you have 2-3 minutes left. So try to keep in time so that the people have the option to or opportunity to ask 2 questions around. So I'm quite strict, so be aware. Okay, so the first speaker is Maria. I have to Vivas Romero. Yeah, that's good. And she's talking about FAIR begins at home.
So it's very strange for an anthropologist to stand in front of a crew of such technical guys, and really the look here comes from my anthropological side. I was hired to be a data steward when I first began my job, but I had previously done a PhD in anthropology. And here is an overview of how we try to implement FAIR at Maastricht University from something that should be in the title, but it isn't, and was called the Community of Data-Driven Insights. Okay. Okay, so this is a CDDI, and it was really a bottom-up initiative at Maastricht University that reunited the researchers, of course, who were at the middle of it, but also the policymakers at the university, those who made the financial decisions, also some expertise, so that's why they hire myself as a data steward, and Carlos, my colleague, who is a data scientist, and also other people that thought about capacity of FAIR. And the goal of this was to have everybody come to the table and decide how are we going to make every research object in the university an FDO by 2025. So we thought, like an anthropologist, we start from the little and then we go to the big thing, and we thought about choosing some pilots, which we called pilots at the time, and then they became the showcases. And these were 9 different research projects that were chosen by the Dean of Research. I think it should have been done the other way around by asking researchers if they wanted to join this FAIR thing. But okay, that's the less democratic side of it. So basically, some of them were really convinced, and others, like people at the humanities, where I work on, not so much. But we chose them based on different disciplines, different methods, different types of data. So we had everything from presidential speeches in the United States to trade secrets in China to a collection of ancient games. We had 9 projects that were very different. And then from there on, we had to go meet with the researchers and sometimes even tell them what FAIR was. Maybe not for the more technical projects, but more for the anthropological projects where they were like, wait a minute, you know, I'm working with trade secrets from China. How is that supposed to be a FAIR thing? And open, because at the time there was a lot of confusion whether that was a synonym or not. And then, of course, after working with these 9 projects, that ended up being 5 projects, we drew it down to 5 projects to the researchers who were really committed and wanted to do the thing with us. We decided to sit together and write the lessons, and that's what we're presenting today. So Carlos, from his more like data scientist point of view, and me more from the data stewardship point of view. So these were the 9 showcases. So as you can see, they were very different. So the SWO in Europe was the one that I was talking about. So where researchers were doing qualitative work for example, the World Bank and other institutions at a higher up level. We had the Logix project, which was a legal-based study that was supposed to create FAIR data for the legal scholars and also for lawyers and for the public atmosphere. We had prof patterns that dealt with student data at the university that was very sensitive and with protocols of pseudonymization. So as you can see, the menu was large, and also what we could do in terms of supporting these researchers to help them with their data becoming FAIR was also limited. So the first challenge we dealt with was dealing with all the showcases, trying to find the support that they needed specifically. So for some of them, we needed engineering capacity. For some of them, we needed pseudonymization techniques that we were not aware of or we didn't have the scope of. For others, we needed help creating metadata internally for the project. So it was really, really large. And at the same time, we were all being commanded to be data stewards and organize fair at one particular faculty. So what I did is I took that showcase as the thing that helped me to design a larger policy for the faculty. So it became a balancing act, and we decided to go with those 5 showcases. And from them, we learned very different lessons. So for example, with the SWO, we learned that FAIR, of course, is about machine readable. But how can we make machine readable that what can be, because it's physical, because it's sensitive, and so on. So acknowledging the interdisciplinary differences, even in repositories such as Dataverse, for example. So the final outcome of this project was to publish the metadata of the project. But the data dictionaries on Dataverse, and this is not a criticism for those of you who work in dance, are really life science oriented. And so how can we create a metadata standards in these things that kind of also listen to different disciplines and so on. Of course, this project helped me to raise the awareness within the faculty of arts and social sciences. It really got the conversation started with other colleagues. And we needed, of course, the budget for it. So, and that, of course, is different in every discipline. We saw that those projects that were financed by larger faculties, such as the MUMC and the hospital, had, of course, more resources to work with versus us as small faculty in the social sciences. So the challenges that we came across were cultural, educational, technical, and financial, but mostly cultural, I would say. So it's really about making the university a fair home, or a home where fair knowledge can be created, and that is different. So from the humanities, where people really see this as an act of love and compassion, because they really want to leave the footprint of theirs in the future. And then you had people, other life science scholars, who see it more as like, oh, you know, we're advancing sciences and machine readery and so on. And so it's really different. So we are now at the scope where the CDI, unfortunately and sadly, has ended. But it has left, I think, a legacy of the policy being implemented. And we were wondering whether to choose new case studies or not, or to have an open call for researchers to themselves sign up and say, we really need your help with making our projects fair. To assess the potential and value of future case studies, identifying their goals, and decide whether to pursue a showcase or not. So that was what we were initially left with. But everything has collided now in an integrated service system that provides FAIR for the whole university, which is the university library, as kind of like an objective partner. And these visions have slowly disappeared. Nonetheless, just some takeaway messages. We need detailed documentation of best practices in FAIR, and this was something that this helped us do. After the projects were launched, more community events and meetings were launched, such as the FAIR Coffees, which is a safe place for researchers to come and talk about how they're doing FAIR currently. We need education, workshops at different levels, and also for specific types of data. So Maastricht University, I'm in charge of creating the RDM FAIR curriculum, and that has gone from a very RDM broad perspective to more like specific. So FAIR for qualitative data, for example, and we explore repositories in the social sciences. We explore how to make your interviews or your transcripts from ethnography fair and so on. So developing that kind of curriculum is also interesting, and I think it's a development that's going on everywhere in the Netherlands. We also need advice and consultancy, and of course, something that I think we all face is the support in the ethical and GDPR aspects and matters of it. I think for now, everybody in Maastricht University works pretty well together on this goal of becoming fair, except really the legal team departments, for which there's a really huge barrier in terms of how GDPR might conflict with some of the fair values and what we're able to make fair. These are some of the researchers that we work with. So, and you can see that the added value for them was really different. So for the social sciences, it was really learning who the data steward is and what FAIR is and how can she help me and so on. And for the others who are more, Adam Jason is in economics, and he was working with the presidential speeches of the United States. For him, it was really about creating a community of people and meeting others who were also interested in sharing like speech softwares to detect speech policies. And for Cody Motley, who's also a scholar who's pretty well advanced, FAIR was also about making that sense of community and meeting other researchers interested. So that's what we've learned from the CDDI that no longer exists, sadly. And where we are right now, transitioning at the university, it's really at implementing FAIR, and the battles that we're fighting now are both political, I think, and financial. So, thank you.
So thank you. Are there questions? No. So you said that you're now challenging with some organization stuff, how to organize it. Is it do you have good signs that you can continue?
Yeah. So with my colleague Pedro, who's in the room now, I think we fought one of the greatest battles recently, which was to get everybody to construct a research registration system that would actually be sort of like the governance structure that would make sure that everybody's doing the right thing to actually be fair at the end of the research project. And it was about gathering the support, first of all the faculties, getting all the disciplines to agree on which software we were going to use. It ended up being the JIRA service structure, something which I think happened at UBA, and that battle has been won politically and I think financially, but it really had to be an effort coming from the bottom up. So from our work as data stewards and then going up to the CEO levels.
Okay, thank you. Oh, there's another question.
How long did it take for you to follow all these projects?
It took about 2 years. So from the moment when we met the researchers, and then most of them were PhD students, so we follow them all across their PhDs. Some have graduated and published with this data, and others are still in the process of.
Is there some other question? If not, thank you once more. And now our next presentation is from Erik Schultes, and he's talking about emerging fair ecological ecosystems. Yeah, so.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Glad to be here. I want to make first a comment on my authorship on this and with my co-authors. I think probably around 2018, the three of us, somewhat independently, became engaged more and more in what we would now call FAIR and verification. And it's recently now that I think we're working much more closely together. And what we would like to report, and what was very nice about having a chance to put this presentation together, was based on a lot of experience working with real communities that are not just trying to like experiment with FAIR, but really try to implement it at scale. We've run into a lot of questions, and many of them are relevant to what we hear, I think, in every presentation in the FDOF presentations here. And so what I would like to do is just kind of tell you about what these questions are and these struggles we have to figure out exactly how these components are going to come together. So first we can say FAIR is really, oh, and I should mention too, this is going to be a tag team presentation. So at some juncture in this presentation, Aerofan will come up and take over. But first I want to say that we have seen this broad acceptance of the FAIR principles, widespread. So I think in that way, you know, that's a victory. But at the same time, FAIR has become a victim of its own success in that there's a lot of questions that remain. And if there's no answers coming soon, then yeah, I think these stakeholders tend to lose interest, and rightly so. So how and who's taking responsibility, and what does this look like? So I think to really advance FAIR, to really get widespread implementations, we're going to need answers, and those answers are going to have to come not only for naive groups and greenfield opportunities, but also for much more well-advanced groups that already have for many years built up a practice, and they know how to do their science, but how can they combine that with FAIR? So when we go in with groups and we try to talk about FAIR and implementation, implicitly there's some sense of a FAIR ecosystem that this would be a part of. But we haven't yet been able to pull together a clear statement on what that ecosystem could look like. There's lots of existing networks right now. There's lots of existing repositories out there. How are they going to verify? What kind of legacies and legacy technologies do they need to consider if they want to advance their level of fairness? We've been working with FAIR implementation profiles quite effectively, I think. The last 2 days, CoData and GoFair had a meeting on convergence. There were 2 afternoon sessions on the work of FAIR implementation profiles, and there's quite some enthusiasm built up around that now. They seem really effective, but they're not enough. There's FAIR data points, there's FAIR digital objects, which we're talking about here. How do these components interrelate and work with each other? What is that going to look like in the final ecosystem? And more importantly, who's got the responsibility to manage or to govern some of these components? And who's going to pay for those? So here's some recent experiences we've had with verification kind of in the real world. Myself speaking, I was in the GoFair organization from the beginning, and we had this mandate. We had a community of implementation networks, very broadly defined, very loosely organized. How are we going to support and coordinate their efforts in verification? Partly this resulted in an approach that we call the FAIR implementation profile. And we've actually put the FIP into practice with a big supporter in the EnVyFair project who really helped us to refine the methodology, the technique, and even the technology behind FIPs. So lots of organizations are involved. The same with the World Fair project now. So CoData is coordinating a project with 11 very broadly defined domains that have this objective of cross-domain interoperability. So a very serious project in verification, and they've just completed a set of assessments with FAIR implementation profiles. And again, earlier this week we heard great reports on that. FIPs are a great starting point, but where to next? So given that we have detailed domain narratives and legacies, and given that we also have a need for infrastructures that can help us manage FIPs and even try to catalyze convergence, and we're still going to need other components like the cross-domain interoperability framework that Aerofan might mention a little bit later. But we're going to need ideas about how to move forward. And then I think for the rest of the presentation, we can kind of classify the problem into 3 broad user groups. So there's certainly the groups that are greenfields or new to FAIR. Some of these groups, maybe like what we just heard, are naive about FAIR and maybe even kind of skeptical of it. Like, why do I need to do this exactly? Who's paying for it? It's just taking time and energy away from my scientific work. So there's room there for FAIR awareness and FAIR workshops. There's a middle group, a group that's already quite mature in their approach to data sharing. There's decades of experience there. These are archives, statistical bureaus, longitudinal studies. But a lot of questions arise in these groups because they're already doing this for so many years. You'll see those questions on the next slide. And then there's this third category of vendors. They're experienced in some way, but they want to invest. And I've had many instances where people from industry are saying, we are ready to invest, but we need to know what we're investing in. And we need some clarity on that. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Aerofan. Big white button.
Oh, cool. It's like an iPod.
Can't go wrong.
Yeah, with Erik, I think we both had a lot of discussions with different people trying to implement FAIR and people who seriously want to implement FAIR in different projects. And you hear certain questions over and over and over. I work with the social behavioral economic sciences in the DDI community. The first question I get from them when I explain FAIR to them is, what else is new? They've been doing this for 20 years. and they're really good at it. And so you get questions like this. Why is this better than what we're already doing? We have good standards, we have adoption, we have tools, we have significant data reuse. The mission of these people is often reuse of data, their archives. And so to them, FAIR is not news. And they ask a lot of very hard questions, like, what's the investment I have to make in new stuff to do what I'm already doing? And what's the payoff? Why? What is the incremental benefit that justifies this? And we need an answer to that question. Who's behind it? This is a big deal because the Fair Digital Object Framework is a volunteer effort by a bunch of academics, basically. And that's not a completely true statement, and I'm aware of that. But the point is, you don't have a lot of institutional backing, and you need it. If you want to be credible, you have to have funding, you have to have reputation, and there are a lot of questions that are coming up in that space. And I know people are thinking of them and trying to answer them, but they're important. I'll come back to that. How is this supposed to work exactly? Erik showed this sort of broken slide of the ecosystem. I drew that broken slide, and I've tried to draw it many times, and I still don't know what I'm supposed to draw. This is a problem. If someone says, how exactly is this supposed to work, you need an answer, and we don't have a good one yet. And that, I think, is a bit of an issue in terms of marketing and implementing FAIR. What piece of this does the FDOF do? You know, what are the other pieces and how do they relate? Where are the tools? And a lot of vendors, I'll talk about vendors in a minute, but if you have no tools, it doesn't matter how good your thinking is or how good the specs are, no one can use them. And so we need to produce stuff that not only is implementable, but that will be implemented practically. How do I learn more about this? Not everybody who cares about FAIR comes to conferences like this. It will never scale if we can't communicate and teach about FAIR. And so there's a lot of questions there still. The last one is a huge one. In this community, people have made massive investments in metadata, and they understand the practice of it, and they want to know, can I leverage what I've already done? And we're asking them to think about metadata at a level they maybe haven't thought about before, and to document a lot of things they've never documented in the past, but they have to get serious about this. And if you can't build on what you've already got, the answer is going to be no. So that's sort of what that community kind of hits you with. Vendors. I come out of the sort of technology space, and I know a lot of people who work for commercial software companies. And some of them ask me about FAIR and the Fair Digital Object Framework. And the first question is, how is this supposed to work exactly? No answer, right? I can't actually tell them. I can tell them what I think, but I can't tell them what the community has agreed. And there's no simple, high-level explanation of that. And then they say, where are the specs? That's always question number 2. Because their question is, I'm going to implement something, show me something that I can read that says exactly what my developers will be working on. And I know that a lot of people are concerned about that. There's a lot of pressure. It's a volunteer effort. But we need the specs as soon as possible, right? And that's really important. I don't think we can emphasize that enough. This question is the killer, though. If I'm going to invest money in this, will there be a return on my investment? Is there a viable market? And I'll come back to this because the Fair Digital Object Framework could enable FAIR, but a market is a specific group that has a specific functionality based on domain models. And if that group is 50 people in 3 universities somewhere in Asia, no market. And a lot of standards die on this rock because they just don't do things that will actually scale. So we have to be practical about that. And the other question is, what tools and services exactly does FAIR really imply? And that there are different answers for different kinds of objects, but we need to really explore that question more moving forward. And I know a lot of people are thinking about this. This isn't a criticism, this is just sort of what you hear from these people, and they're good questions, and we need good answers for them. Here's part of it. I don't do yin-yang stuff, that's Erik's doing, but I like it. We have this framework that's essentially a protocol. Yeah, I can do fair digital objects, and that's great. You need that. It's the foundation layer. But the minute you want to try to build applications, you have to deal with the models and the domains. Interoperability happens at the domain level, and that is a huge problem. And it's a problem most people say, oh, we'll never solve this. And I've seen a lot of hand-waving already at this event, because nobody wants to take this on. It's a nightmare, but it's the nightmare we have to solve if we want these to be viable markets for a scalable FAIR. And there's some work in that area that I'll talk about in a minute. There's this idea, and this comes out of World Fair, it's one of the things we're exploring, that you could have a lingua franca, that is a set of common standards, things like PROV and DCAT and schema.org, and there are a bunch of these standards. If we could agree a core set of profiles that would cover the minimum bases in terms of cross-domain interoperability, that could be really, really enabling and let people like vendors say, oh, those are the services I start building and I make them configurable. And then they see a market. But we have to come up with good approaches to this. We don't know what that looks like exactly, but we have to make it happen. So a couple of thoughts. The first thing is, and a lot of people seem to address this whole topic as if it's the web again. It's not. We live in a world where there's a huge amount of competition for data sharing. And lots of people who will tell you they have the answer. And we've got to explain why we're better. And I think that it's not enough that we build it and they will come, because we will build it and they won't come. And that is a problem. And so I don't want to rain on anybody's parade, but we have to be very, very smart about how we sell this to the world if it's going to be viable. What is that architecture for a fair ecosystem? I know we could write that document, but have we written that document? I really, really want a white paper that says, here are the components of FAIR, here's how they plug into a domain, here's how the FDOF enables it, here's what FAIR data points do, et cetera, here's how a FIP is used to make this happen. I can't emphasize that enough. We need that white paper, and it needs to be on a website where I can point to it. The other big question, though, and I don't know the answers here, is who's going to support FAIR? If we really have these specifications and we expect people to implement them and we expect this to be a scalable network, where's the W3C in this picture? You know, where are the standards bodies that support the specs? Where are the groups that provide the resources and the cooperation and the guidance and all the stuff on this slide? What about conformance? Oh God, nobody wants to talk about conformance, but it's important. How do you assess FAIR? Again, World FAIR is exploring this a little bit, but there are a lot of very serious questions that we need answers to. And so this is not, I know there'll be like a panel tomorrow looking at some of these issues about governance in the FAIR Digital Object Forum. That's really good. We need answers to this. We need funding. We need administration. We need all of these things if we're going to be mature and serious in scale. And so that's like a really grim presentation, huh? But that's what we learned. You know, I don't want to be negative about this. I believe in it, but I do think we have to be serious about it. That's kind of the message.
So thank you. I allow one question, because Maria was in time.
Just very quick. Where do you think this big funding chunk will come? Like really, like 80% from vendors, 20% from public, or 80% from public and community, non-charity? Where is it coming? Yeah. How do you see it?
I don't think vendors will fund public good beyond a certain point. I do know vendors who are very interested in capitalizing on open data. And because of that, there's a certain amount of investment we can get from them. They will not coordinate this. I think we have to go with governmental and super governmental funding. And it is a public good, and it's very different than the web that way, because the web was a big commercial play, and the public good was lower. So I think we do need to go after grant funding and try to engage people like the official statistics world, where they have actual budgets and not just projects. But we need to sell it big if we're going to do that.
Very quickly. Ivonne, is it a white paper or is it a specification? And if it's a specification, or it's not just a white paper that says this is what we need. Don't we need to start specifying it a bit more?
I believe that's true. However, there's a lot of good work going on at the specification level here. I think what we need is an agreed overall game plan, and then the specifications can figure out how to perform their roles within that. First, I want to know what the roles are. The roles are a white paper. The specifications have to follow and support it. So I think we do need both things, but they go in that sort of order in my mind.
So thank you once more. It was very, very important statements you made, actually. If there you have, yeah. And of course, if there are other questions, we have sometimes in the breaks and ask the people there. So the next speaker is actually Barbara Magagna, and she's talking about FIPs in practice.
Oh, is this? Can I take it off?
Okay. Thank you. Okay, I don't see the first slide of my presentation. Can I have my presentation, please? Actually, I will continue on the discussion about FIPs in practice, fair implementation profiles. And Erik Schultes was actually the creator of this concept. I was the architect leading the implementation for the fair implementation profiles. Marek Suchanek is from the code events, providing a tool for making this happen. And Tobias Kuhn is present here, hopefully. I have seen him. Yeah, he is the architect of Nano Publications, which is the representation of fair enabling resources that I'm going to present. So, what we are trying to do is to find the digital objects that help to provide some fair aspects for data and metadata, and we call them fair enabling resources, and they address specific aspects of the FAIR principles. For each of these sub-principles, we could identify fair enabling resource types, and the FIP is a profile collecting is a collection of all these human agreements addressing each of the FAIR principles, and it is represented in a machine-readable way. And to be able to do this, we developed an ontology, a very simple ontology, where everything is concentrated around FIP declarations, these agreements, within a community. So the community is very important. So people have to sit together and think about what has, which fair enabling resources are implemented in their ecosystem, addressing each of the fair guiding principles. And you see that there's addressing the different type of use of these fair enabling resources. You can use something currently, and the fair enabling resources can be available or still in development, because we experience, I come from the ENRI FAIR ecosystem. There are 14 research infrastructures, and they have lots of solutions already working for them that are not really fair, but they try to get fair and fairer by developing fair enabling resources, and they had really the requirement to represent this. So we had to include this. And we differentiated between available fair enabling resources and such resources that are still in development. And we also differentiated in the association. So we say it declares current use of, but also planned use. And if at the moment something is used, it can also be replaced in future with a more fair resource. And we also distinguish between fair enabling resources that are appropriate for metadata and those for data. And everything can also be accompanied by a consideration which is purely human readable, because people also want to understand why such a choice has been taken. We were thinking about how to differentiate the different resources for each of the FAIR principles, and we call them FAIR types. For each of them, you see here for F1, we identify our services, F2 metadata schema, F3 the linkage between metadata and data, that's also a schema, then search engines, registries for F4, and you can see all the differentiations. The last one, the R1.3, we interpret this that the fair implementation profile as such is the answer for it. So because it's a community-specific collection of fair enabling resources, of standards that they should all use. And probably what I have learned in the last days, we have to make it a bit more machine actionable and make out of this R1.3 validation service, built on the decisions that we collect here. Then I think we are a step further. Then everything what we select, so all these fair enabling resources must be referenceable. They need to have a persistent, a global, unique, persistent, and resolvable identifier. We call them GUPRIs. And nano-publications can help here because they are really unique and they are also trusty in that sense that an author can publish about a resource and you can be sure that this is not corrupted. And the nano publication has 3 layers of information. The blue layer is a collection of assertions about a fair enabling resource. The orange one is indicating who has really published this information with the ORCID, and in the yellow part you see when this has been published and which metadata schema was used for it. Then this is the tool we use, this is the FIP wizard. It's a very nice user-friendly tool which provides the questions, and the answers are delivered as drop-down lists where you really just choose from a list of nano publications. So they have the real identifier for each of the resources, and if you don't find it in your drop-down, you are allowed to mint your own fair enabling resource identifier and metadata about this resource. You might say that there are lots of metadata identifiers out there that you could use. Yeah, there is fair sharing and there are others, but there is not really a collection of all the different types. So it's important that you link to these metadata records, and that's what we we also do already, and we want to improve. Yes, and you can see here, can I go back? Yes. You can see here also, it's a very simple structure. You are asked to provide a list of fair enabling resources for a specific question, addressing one specific aspect of the FAIR principles. So, and you can say, I have nothing to say to this principle, or I have one or more fair enabling resources, and I have also to specify if I'm currently using this, or plan to use it, or I will also replace it with another one. Here's the whole pipeline, how this is done. I don't go into details. I just want to say there are so many nano publications out there. There needs to be some qualification step in between, because you could also mint something which makes no sense. No, I don't think that this is really happening very often, but you could also misinterpret something. And this is called the qualification. Actually, I must admit, I am the person doing this. I also do some errors, so it's not sustainable how it is now, because this becomes a big problem when we scale this up. And I tell this a little bit, I will come back to that. But anyhow, we need a qualification step in between. Yeah? And then everything is collected in a triple store, we can sparkle over it, and then we can really produce metrics of communities and fair enabling resources that makes these results really comparable. And we call this the convergence matrix, or also the FIP matrix. This allows to converge because you then really see the result. Important is, just doing the exercise will not help. We need workshops. We need people to sit together, to discuss together, to find ways how some convergent solutions can be found. And therefore, we call them the FIP events or FIP workshops, because the social aspect here is the most challenging and not the technical. Okay, and also it's important, not everybody is able to sparkle. I should know it, I can a little bit, but I'm not an expert in this. So we have to provide nice user interfaces to provide a search capability over it. Also to learn from other communities how they implemented it, and probably just to, if we trust this community, we can just take the solution and modify where needed. Although this depends really on the maturity of the community itself, because if a community exists already for 10 years, they will have their solutions, which mostly are not fair. The important thing is we get out of it human readable, but also machine readable information, as JSON LD, and expressed as nano publications. So many statements, many assertions in nano publications, and the FIP is an index over these expressions. And here I come again to the Fair Digital Object Framework from Luis Bonino, trying to understand and adopt it to the nano publication, and happy to get feedback if I am not correctly interpreting it. But let's speak about fair enabling resources. This is data. Yeah? Then we have metadata about this fair enabling resource. We need for both persistent identifiers, and we have to link them bidirectionally. You should come from the data to the metadata, and from the metadata to the data back. And you also would like to know about where can I download this resource. So we need a location UI. And the metadata should really be built based on a metadata scheme depending on the type of the fair enabling resource. Yes, and I think that's in simple words what the Fair Digital Object Frameworks wants to say. There are more details, but the nano publication actually tries already to implement it, or more specifically, the nano publication metadata scheme for fair enabling resources is doing this. Because in the assertion part, you have links, you have here in the nano publication many, many links to identifiers. But one is referring to the location UI where you can download the nano, the fair enabling resource. You have the link, the identifier to the fair enabling resource itself, and that's very similar to the Fair Digital Object Framework. You have also the link to the metadata scheme that has been used, and you have the metadata identifier. That's the whole nano publication UI. So here a few words about the metrics. You see the communities and the fair enabling resources, and you see one column is the profile of one community, and this makes us really comparable. But the problem is we get each year longer and longer lists of fair enabling resources, and this is just last year in autumn when we did, or was it in spring this year, we reviewed the status of the fair enabling of the fair implementation for the NREs, and it was quite a long list of more than 180 resources. But now World Fair came in and also used this approach with 11 big domains and a lot of more institutions and communities participating. And I have heard, I have not analyzed them, I got many, many emails to check for all the fair enabling resources, but there are hundreds and going towards thousands. It's not more manageable, not by one human. So we have to really automatize this process to qualify it. We have to find the big, disturbing nano publications and to correct them or to improve them. Yeah, and this will be hard work. So you see, CoData is using this. We had pre-symposium workshops in 2020, Envy Fair, Woden Africa, Odyssey, EOS Nordic, World Fair, and in future, very near future, and this scares me a little bit, is also NIH Office of Data Science Strategy in the US. So before we do that, we need to make it more sustainable. And therefore, this is the list of the members at the moment of the FAIR Implementation Profile and Practice Working Group at the FAIR Digital Object Framework, the FAIR Digital Object Forum. And these people that are listed here are those that helped us to frame this approach in the different components. But we need much more people to help us because we need to make this sustainable. We need a sustainable framework and a service for these FIPs. What we have is a starting point, very nice for Envy Fair. There it worked. But we need to make it much more scalable. So we have, but before we do that, we have to look again at the level of accuracy when you mint a fair neighboring resource, because it can be really minted at different levels. You can address a specific instantiation of a type or a group of fair neighboring resources. We have to discuss about the FIPs, if they could be part of the core metadata of a fair digital object, because I think if the machine knows about all these details and we provide this information in such a way that a machine can really interpret it, then this will help to make it machine actionable, really to let the machine know what you can do with this data. So, but I think we are not yet there, so we need people to help us to find out what is still missing. Then we need to automate the FAIR qualifications. We need a user-friendly search engine for FIPs and FAIRs, because not everybody can sparkle. And we have already a solution, or we think to have a solution, which is not yet implemented, but it will be. That's the FAIR Connect portal. So that's the portal that GoFair, together with iOS Press and CoData and HealthRI and we have 5, I think. We try to build up so that data stewards can really learn from other communities how FAIR implementations can be applied and what is used. It has been presented on Tuesday. It will be built over the next months. And I think the very first feature will be to provide a search engine over the FAIR neighboring resources and the FIPs. Yeah, and then we need supporting services for FIP analytics to make nice analysis over the results of the FAIR implementation profiles. And we think, last but not least, that FIPs can be real good drivers for FAIR digital objects, because if FAIR digital objects are answers for F3 to link metadata to data in a proper way so that machines can interpret this. And when we have these workshops, everybody has a problem, F3 is difficult. Well, there is might be a solution that might also be scalable in future, but we have some ideas how to do this in future. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so thank you. I allow one question, so you took 20 minutes actually. So I will say something about this for the next speaker. So, one question, who is the most interested? Okay.
Ben Schaap from Wageningen University. Given the previous presentation, where all these questions were asked about different stakeholders in making it fair, what do you think the sweet spot is for FIP adoption? So which community inside the research domain is the sweet spot for adoption?
Adoption of the FIP or
The FIP
yeah,
approach.
yeah. I think communities on different levels. We in Envy Fair had the research infrastructures as a community. But the definition of community is really also very flexible, which is good and bad at the same point. But sometimes some of these who created fair implementation profiles, we had 57, although we had only 14 research infrastructures. They opt to go a step lower at the data repository level. So there are communities around the data repository, which makes sense, but normally you should have the same implementations all over your repositories. But so I hope in future we should have less profiles, less fair enabling resources, because we should converge, right?
So thank you, Barbara. That's very interesting. A little bit too long. So I really have to say, try to keep the time. So the next speaker is Donald Winston. Try not to ignore me if I stand up, right?
Also, just yell at me. I have no problem with that.
I jump into your...
Say like, stop.
Okay, good. Yeah, so respect and be fair to the other speakers, so try to keep in time, okay? Do you want to?
Sure. Thank you. Also, if I had to choose one person to take up my time and lessen the time of my talk, I don't think I could do better than Barbara. I really enjoyed that, and I think you all needed to hear that, so I'm fine with that. Okay, my name is Donnie Winston. I'm here from New York. I'm representing the Fair Points organization as well as my own company. Talking about fair points, there are lots of ways of saying fair points, digital object. What's a fair point? It's an effort to make fair training material that's very bite-sized and interoperable. So this is the idea of it being a fair point. And the joke is like, oh, that's a fair point. So that's sort of like the reasoning behind that, but it's just thematic. And this is going to be talking about some work that we have been doing that's schema disciplined, and trying to fit that in with what I've been excited about with specifically the fair digital object framework conceptualization of a fair digital object, and like what that can mean, and flesh it out. Right, I have this. Okay. So I'm gonna walk by my idea of the diagram in the fair digital object framework thing step by step. So I'd like your coordinate with what I'm doing. So the first step, and this already exists today, and it's in the diagram. The idea is you have an identifier, and you want to issue a GET request for the bytes. Okay, so we need to have that, right? We already have that today generally. Whether it's persistent or not, I don't know. So in our case, we want to be given an identifier to get a digital object, which for this example demonstration would be an educational Q&A page. More specifically, it'd be a page that has a question and a bunch of answers, but it would be marked up with a schema.org QA page markup, so it's semantic, but that's sort of like the object. It's a page people can go and add questions, but that's kind of the resource that you would get naively. So you know, in the back end, it looks something like this. Like here's an example question uses the QA page schema.org thing. So this is actual data about what is open science. Here's one answer. The UNESCO definition. So you can collect these sorts of things. But that's the specific topic is irrelevant. It's just it does have a schema. It's an object. It has a representation as machine actionable JSON, maybe an HTML page, whatever. Okay. The next part, based on my reading, is okay. Not only get the digital object, but we want a first-class way of getting the metadata. Now, how that's implemented profile-wise, I don't think we're going to get an additional HTTP keyword. I think it'll be a different functional profile, like headers or something. But we want to say like, no, I don't want this digital object. I want to get metadata records, and not just a head request on the digital object. I want to get rich metadata. And my thought about this was that it isn't one metadata record. It's a container. Actually, in the page of the spec, it's posited that it would be a linked data platform container object. So the idea is you'd point to this thing that you could then page through lots of metadata records. So people could say different things about an object. And this is actually crucial to our interest at Fair Points, because we're interested in supporting a plurality, a diversity of viewpoints. People might have different things to say, different things to assert. So this is the same kind of like idea behind the nanopubs ontology, where like, this isn't truth, it's just, this is an assertion, this person asserted it. So the idea is you have this container. I actually think that within the container, the metadata records that are pointed to, I think those could easily be nanopubs. I think that could be a realization of the metadata record within the metadata record container. And anyway, so that's the idea for that. In our case, because we're interested in fair training material, so someone might use this Q&A page or something else as part of fair training. You know, like what is open science, what is fair. So we need a metadata schema for that. There could be a nanopublication, but here's an example. It's implemented in Python, but it's extending the schema.org learning resource to conform to the bioschema's training material profile. And these profiles, people have mentioned this, is very important, because if you have a learning resource, there are a bunch of things that you can put in there. Like you can have a name. You don't have to have a name. You can have a description. You don't have to. Everything's optional. What a profile can do is and like what this says, is like, okay, it's a learning resource, but it needs a description. It needs a name. It needs keywords. So these are the minimum required fields. So we're conforming to the training material profile of learning resource, and we can have that as a new class. So this is sort of where that fits into the diagram, or at least my reading of it. You get metadata, can conform. All these metadata records can conform to a metadata schema, which are in turn determined by an object type. And so in my case, the object type would be very simply a URL. The object type is a learning resource, or is a training, or there might be like a separate between the metadata. Like the object type might be two types. Like the object is a Q&A page. The metadata is a learning resource, but you just need those URLs. Those are the types. And you can build on linked data to then go and follow your nose on those types and what those types actually mean. So this is sort of similar for answer, and so similarly, I didn't name these, but these are profiles for specifically what Google requires when you have a Q&A page and you can get recipient results. A Q&A page specifically has to have a main entity, required property. That should be a question. This isn't, in the Q&A page schema, et cetera. Questions should have suggested answers, accepted answers, text URLs. So this is just to show how you would like practically implement this programmatically in one language. These are where we source from, schema.org. So these resolve, and they give more details. So this is what search engines use for a lot of that stuff. So we're building off of that in order to get higher visibility. As Barbara mentioned, it's one thing to have a lot of resources, but how do you expose them in a way that people can find them easily? So this is a way of like, well, for now, let's just piggyback off of Google and the other search engines that use schema.org and parse that, so that they'll be our search engines for now for this stuff. We could have our own separate one, but let's build off of that. Okay, I wanted to briefly, off to the browser. I was disappointed that at a fair conference, the only permissible way of displaying things was sending a PDF. He's opened some browser tabs, and okay. So just for example, I showed some code. So I have like a server that the techies will recognize. Oh, localhost, he must be running something. So this is like a JSON representation, but ultimately it would be a page with schema.org markup that could actually be rendered as a web page. But so that's one thing just to show that filters through. Let's go on. And now I have actual things that resolve. So I had our helper graciously open some browser tabs. I sent him some links. Okay, so yes, I wanted to go through quickly. We don't have to scroll through this. I just want to say that this is real. There are a bunch of questions that we have populated, but it's not up yet. But there's a GitHub repo. I'll have a link at the end where you can follow this work. Next page. Right, yeah, so just to show, like, currently the idea is it just returns, like, the JSON documents, but for people who know, it's a simple matter with HTTP of returning a different type. If the browser, wants text HTML, you send that. If you want a JSON LD, you send that. So it's sort of simpler at the conceptual level. And just to show that there's a framework up there for that. Go ahead, next page. so for example, fair points, apart from the QA pages, we've actually done these fair points learning resources for some of our events. So here you can see a rendering of one of our events that has resources, presentation, recording. Here are the authors. Here are the points that were output collectively from that event. And here's another event that we have. So we're collecting these as fair JSON metadata. Next slide. This is hosted on a GitHub static site. So you can see like this is the JSON that renders that web page, right? So you can see how things might connect in that area. Go ahead to the next. So I want to touch briefly on PIDs. So none of this is up yet, but I wanted to outline quickly a PID strategy that we have. So for example, this UNESCO document on the actual document is important. It's one of the references in our open science, what is open science answers. But you'll notice it has a PID up here, which is an ARK. ARK stands for Archival Resource Key. And so UNESCO is a big user of that. And I want to show how that scheme works. So if you go to the next page, so UNESCO has this ARK ID. So this is the equivalent to like a DOI prefix. So they've been delegated 48223. And you can go to name2thing.net or identifiers.org. Go to the previous page. Yeah. And essentially, it's just a forward proxy. So whenever you identify this ARK, any prefix, it passes through, the suffix passes through the ID to unesco.org ARK/ID. So that's how, if you can go to name2thing.net, that ARK, and you'll end up resolving to that full UNESCO address. So it's a nice PID service like that. So if you go to the next slide. Right, so there are about 1,000 people with like name assigning authority numbers. You can just get one of these. You don't have to get a prefix from, with DOIs you have to get a prefix from DataCite or Crossref. You fill out a form. It's called a non form. It has a picture of a non, like the Indian non, because it's name assigning authority number. I have one of these, so you can just get one of these. And if you go to the next slide, so for example, this is my company, so I have this ARK, so I can mint IDs as many as I want, and it will redirect to this site, which can then redirect to other sites or whatever. But so you have that persistence, and of course, persistence is a matter of service. So you always have this ID, but I can sort of change where this redirects to. Okay, next. Yeah, 1 minute. Okay, great. Fair points. Again, mostly the idea is to, well, you know what, I'm actually going to leave this to Sarah in the Q&A if she wants to elaborate on this. But so part of what we do is trying to verify event output, where the event is focused on bringing people together, diverse perspectives, and verifying that material, the outcome of that event. And one of the things that we did well, it sounds like a lot like the fair implementation profile workshops. Okay. Right, but another thing here was developing Q&A and developing training materials. Maybe we can go to the next slide. I don't know what I have there. Do I have something there? No. Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll go through the rest of the slides real quick. I think there are just a few slides. So that would be the PDF. Yeah. So next slide. Right. So bringing it all together. This is the last component. But my impression is there's a separate privilege get identifier record request, which points to all these things that we've already done. Next slide. Oh, right. Thank you, Siri. Okay. So I mentioned W3C, like data platform, as what I think would be great, and was proposed in the FDOF paper for the metadata record container record. This is it all together, and I just want to give some links. So fairpoints.org, a GitHub page where we source some of these things, and my work on the Q&A pages thus far. So thank you for your attention, and I don't know if we have any time for questions.
So thank you. So one quick question with a quick answer from you, please.
It's not a question, and I don't even need an answer.
Good.
So
Perfect. Quick comment.
I just want to commend Donnie, because it's one of these examples where somebody that we didn't even know before made a podcast about all the FAIR principles, and rather than the frustration that I said yesterday that many people misinterpret the FAIR principles, he was spot on every time. So we actually republished this podcast, and you were spot on again today. So compliments.
I don't think anyone virtually will hear that because you weren't using a microphone, but thank you, Barry. He said some very nice things. Yeah. Okay. Great.
Go on. Thank you. The next speaker is Esteban Gonzalez. Yeah. On challenges for fair digital objects assessment.
Try to go fast. No? Let's see what happens. Okay, so welcome everybody. So my name is Esteban Gonzalez. I'm a research software engineer at Ontology Engineering Group in the University of Polytechnic Madrid. And also I'm a PhD student, so my topic of research is fair assessment, of course, okay? But also extraction of resources, we can say resources or digital objects from scientific publications and publish it like a fair digital objects, okay? So, sorry. Oh, the other one, sorry. So I'm going to talk about, I'm working in several European projects like Reliance, together with Anne, and also in fair impact. So I'm going to present today some challenges that we have found trying to assess the fairness of, for example, research objects, and how could we address it, okay? So, well, what is the role exactly of the FDO in new publications models? So the traditional model is very easy, right? You have a text, you have data inside of the text that is a little bit weird if you want to reproduce the research, and also the software is mentioned. But what happens with the software is normally it's mentioned like the GitHub repository, but it is not. The GitHub repository is not a persistent identifier. So, well, it's a little bit weird. So with the rise of the computers, that they are more powerful, and the big data, okay, the data is everywhere. It's any place we can find it, and in large amounts of data. So we need to publish all this data, not only the text of the scientific, but if we want to reproduce this experiment, for example, we need to publish the data also, like a FAIR. But in the reproducible publications, not only the data is important, also the software. So if we want to be more transparent, we need the software. We need the software to use, for example, to generate the data that we are producing. Okay. So there is a need to publish more research active, as we say. So one of the first questions I say, okay, when I started to learn about digital objects, what is the nature of the digital objects? I read like there is a collection of bytes, or, well, perfect. But what is the nature? There is a document, a software, data, documents. So I realized that it can be anything. Okay, from the simple, like documents, to the more complex object, like, for example, a research object. So can we assess its fairness in the same way? That's a very fair question, okay? So let's take a look to the FAIR principles, okay? So I started digging and say, okay, the FAIR principles, persistent identifiers, open protocols, I think we can, I don't care about the nature of the digital object, I can treat it, I can deal with it in the same way, we can say, okay? Because with the interoperable, the thing is changed right now, okay? Because, of course, you can use the same formal language for all the digital objects, okay? But the vocabularies are different, okay? You cannot use the same vocabulary to describe data, to describe a document, or, for example, the software. So, well, let's see. But the problem comes here with the reusability. Because when I read, okay, metadata are richly described. Wow, what this means, richly described? Authors, title? Which kind of metadata? And is the same metadata for the different domains? I don't think so. And is the same metadata, rich metadata, are the same for the different nature of the resources inside of the digital objects? No, I don't think so. So we start thinking in the problem, and some challenges, no, sorry. No, sorry again. So I'm starting to looking for, okay, I'm going to look at some fair assessment tool, and I found Fuji. That's an amazing tool that you can analyze the fairness of the digital, well, with the data, okay? So you can find, like here, on a total score, but also you can find the different tests that you execute, okay, to produce this score, okay? This is a global score, okay? It's basically is the total number, well, the test passed by the application, okay, divide by the total number. Okay, that's very nice. But when I try to looking for another kind of digital object like ontologies, okay, there is another tool, FIPs. And the tests are not the same. Well, that's a big problem. It's quite similar, okay? But it's different, the tool, the tests that they execute. And when I try to go to the software, that I'm a research software engineer, so I'm very interested in that, I discovered, oh, it's a totally different tools. Look at this. The metadata that we analyze, well, license is the same, but citation, yes, but the checklist or code repository, there are different, okay? So, how can I don't know, put all together to analyze the assessment of the fairness of the digital object? So we found some challenges. The first one is resource score discrepancy. So in this case, if I try to use different tools but analyze the same digital object nature, for example, for the data, if I use different tools for analyze the data, I will get different scores depending of the tests that execute this. So this is, I think that this is a problem. But also how to calculate the score of a fair digital object. We can see some examples in Fuji that, okay, I use the total number of tests, okay, and to calculate this fairness. But look at this. Each dimension of the fair may have different number of tests. So there is a principle of over-representation, okay? If one of the dimensions, for example, findable, have more tests than the other one, can be produce a over-representation on that. And another interesting question is, have all tests the same importance? Okay, it's the same to check the persistent identifier that the license or the other one? That's a nice question. And all this information is aggregated in the total score. But also the heterogeneous FDO metadata. We will see in the previous presentations. Okay, the metadata may be specific to a certain domain or the nature of the FDI. There is no common metadata schema. So this is a problem to assess the fairness of the digital object. So we start thinking on that. And for example, we say that some metadata records are common to digital object, but others specific to the FDI, as I said. But for example, there is initiatives like the FDO framework that say, okay, no worry, because we can have different metadata schema for each type, but not only for each type of digital object, also for the domain, okay? So I think it's a very good starting point to start working on that and to assess the fairness of digital objects. Also, the score can change significantly depending on the method used to calculate the scores. For example, I can put two examples of the method. This is a global score, that's the space between divided by the total number of tests, but you can use the other score, for example, to calculate or to ponderate the difference principles inside of the digital object. But they will be produced at different scores. So that's the key point. Not only that, it depends also the test. So it's a complex problem. It's not an easy solution for them, okay? And we think that it's important to explain the method and the provenance that we use. So this is not all, the importance is not the score, the total score. The important is the way you calculate this score. That be transparent and everybody can see it, okay? And for that, we believe that this is important that they reach an agreement between inside of the community. So the community can say, okay, I want to calculate the score in this way, okay? And the objective of, as I say, the objectives of the first scoring system should not be produced as a ranking, but become a mechanism to improve the fairness of the digital object, okay? So we don't have to put all the effort or the focus on the score. We need to put the effort in how to explain how to improve my digital object, depending on the nature, of course, and the domain. I will put you an example. This is a research object. It's basically a research object is an aggregation of research artifacts like data, ontology, software, images, wherever. And there are links between them, so they are related, okay? So in this case, we start thinking, okay, a research object is a digital object. Yeah, of course, it's a digital object. Well, we believe that this is a digital object, but it's a very complex digital object because inside of this digital object, there are more digital objects. So we don't know exactly how to treat it, how to deal with that, but we thought that, for example, if we want to measure the fairness of the research object, we need to measure the fairness of each resource that is inside of the digital object, and we will use the tools that I showed you before, okay, to do it. But also, the digital object has their own metadata, okay. For example, it is not the same the title in the author of the research object than the title and the authors of the data, for example, okay. So we need to analyze all this. And all this score, we can say, all these tasks that we execute on the research object, we aggregate it and a final score. Okay. So we use two metrics, but of course, I think this metrics it must be to provide an agreement inside of the community to do it. So as a summary, the score without contextual information, it means explication, guidelines, methods, is meaningless. Okay. Fairness should be calculated based on a bottom-up approach, I believe, okay, from the community from the community, starting from the community, and the fair assessment should be based on metadata schemas based on the nature and the domain of the digital objects. So, thank you for your attention, and well, if you have any question.
I have a question because I was moderating another session, and there we heard about how does software fit into the FDO landscape. Carlos Martinez Ortiz, are you working with him?
No.
You should try here.
In mobile application.
So
okay.
my skills is to connect people. So.
Oh, fantastic! Fantastic. I think the FIPs can play a crucial role to, I don't know, to extract these requirements from the community, okay, to implement. So.
Can I?
Yeah, sure.
Actually, maybe I did have a comment/question, because from the software perspective, I think the assessment, the most important part of having any type of score is the reuse part. If you're not, for software in particular, if you're not able to reuse it, then you could have a score of 99.999, but it's just, you can find it and find all the properties about the software, but you just can't reuse it because it doesn't work. Then actually your score should be 0 because there's no point on the rest. So I think if having some kind of way of weighing is like, okay, it's well, it doesn't have an author, but you can run it, then already there's something to improve. You can improve the metadata, but you can still reuse it. And I think that for software in particular, I see the reuse as being the most important part of an object being fair.
I totally agree. And even more, because for example, this kind of test just only checking, okay, there is some documentation, for example, a README file in the GitHub repository, that is fine, but they don't assess the quality of the README file. Okay, so probably there is a README file and say, okay, follow this instruction, but you do it, and it is not working. So,
now,
well.
so let me first fully support what was just said. But I've seen people saying, oh, if you are F, A, and I, you're of course reusable. No, the R principles are the end of it. You know, F, A, and I support R.
Yeah.
And the rich metadata, as you correctly said, is a community choice. And there is other reasons for not reusing data. They may be very bad quality, but hey, that's in the eye of the beholder. So we need provenance, who collected the data, who blah, blah, blah. That's an R principle. And of course, it comes back from A, the license. Because even it could be perfectly fit for repurposing the data for the new thing you want to do as a machine or as a human. But if the license prohibits you to do that, it's still not reusable for that purpose. But that is a nuance. It couldn't be fully answering to the FAIR principles. And the license says this is national security level, you cannot use it unless you call A, B, C, or you hack it. You know, so
Yeah. Well, the problem with the software, you know, is that you have to check the license of each library that you use. So that's it's difficult to do.
Well, computers are good in doing stupid work. So.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Thank you. I also will connect you with one of my colleagues as we also check the different methods of testing fairness on some data we have. So now the last presentation, so I'm sorry we are 6 minutes late. The last presentation is from Vincent Emonet, and the floor is yours.
How do I put it?
Oh, no, this is my computer. It's you have to use this one.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to talk about, yeah, actually it's going to be a bit a good follow-up with Esteban presentation, because I looked also a bit in the same problematic, and yeah, there will be probably some partial answers to some of the questions and over questions also. Yeah, so we're going to get fast on the context, because I think everyone now knows a bit about the FAIR FDO. So this is the main, basically it's a framework that will ask to have like predictable identifier and metadata attached to an object if you want to make it really easy. And yeah, one of the big problem when you think about it is how do you know if a published digital object meets the requirement to be considered fair, and fair according to who, and fair for who. So usually fair in certain community or for a certain data object type will be different. Yeah, it's going to be different depending on the object type and the community it is used in. So how do we make sure we cover all those use cases? Yeah, so the thing is, the FAIR principle, they cover the functional requirements, but they don't say exactly how to implement them in technically. And so, yeah, so it's not that easy. In 2018, Mark Wilkinson and Michel de Monte worked on a framework for defining metrics for fairness. But so it was going a bit further than just the fair principle, because it was saying a bit this is how we should be evaluating those different metrics, and they define like 14 universal metrics. But that can change depending on the domain. So in short, how it works, this FAIR metrics framework, is that individual tests are published as HTTP APIs endpoint, and each test takes a subject as URL as input, and it will return a score between 0 or 1 if it failed or if it worked, and logs. So the different logs of why what have been tested and why we didn't score well. And then you have a central FAIR evaluation service that allows people to build collections of those tests, and then evaluate URLs against this collection. So one of the advantages is then you can have common tests for checking, for example, the metadata protocol, but then you can also have specific tests that will check which metadata are there, is there the right metadata for my community, and then you can put those tests inside a collection and just run. So you could have the collection, for example, for FAIR ontology or FAIR dataset, and you run this collection. Actually, while doing this, we reviewed every FAIR evaluation service, like Fuji or FAIR Checker or the FAIR Evaluator, to see which one were fitting our needs. And the problem is that I updated the slide, but during the presentation, so it's not up to date. But one of the problem is that when you have the FAIR Evaluator that was originally built, but that is, I don't know if people have used it here, but it's really slow. It can takes 15 minutes to evaluate a URL, and so most people working in with us could not use it, because you're not going to wait 15 minutes for every time you're going to send an evaluation. And over existing solution like Fuji, for example, Fuji is not extensible. Is that Fuji is a huge pile of Python code, but it still uses the same, really the same framework in the fact that you have the different fair principle and the test. So we try to look a bit in between the two, and over also like fair checker, to see how we could try to improve it a bit. And also we wanted to give communities the possibility to easily build and publish those tests, because I'm not going to write the test for everyone, like for every domain and every object. So what we come up with is a library in Python, because like most people today, when you want to do data science, you want to do it in Python. And with documentation and helpers function to really handle all the parts like scoring and logging for the fair thing, the fair test. You can find it at this URL. It's on the GitHub page. And what it looks like is that, in the end, it allows you to deploy API with a test. Here you can see there are two tests. This is an API for various. I re-implemented basically a lot of the fair metrics with Python also to better understand what was needed to build it. And then it's an open API described, so it's quite easy to reuse it, just even like if you want to test individually the test. And we also built it with another one for rare disease, for the rare disease community. This is how actually the project started, because we were doing this with them on in a hackathon. And damn it! Oh yeah, cool. Okay. But then those tests, when you deployed it, I added a bit of code, because I've seen I was thinking at the beginning, maybe the audience will not like code, and I see you put some. Because actually we used a bit the same also way of using fast API and type annotations and inheritance in Python to make it quite usable and easy for developers, and like modern proof kind of for the future. So so technically now you can the test that you publish with our library, you can then register them either in the original Fair Evaluator or in Fair Enough, because also we like a good pun. And so Fair Enough is basically a rewrite of the Fair Evaluator to fix some of the issues it has with ORC-ID, login, and just being really, really slow. So now we a bit rewrote everything. So now also we added the GraphQL API. So most of the interaction is done through a classical HTTP POST API or GET thing. But we also added the GraphQL API to allow to give people more power over like searching through evaluation, saying, okay, give me all the evaluation where this test is wrong or this test is positive. And so it's still experimental, but it can be quite convenient if you search really specific things. And then, so you will register your test. So you can see actually we have tests from Fair Enough. We have the tests that I developed in Python, but there are also the original tests that were written by Mark, and we're actually running directly on his infrastructure. But we're running them in 5 seconds. Versus 10 minutes previously, so this is like really, even for Mark's test, the collection that was previously doing 15 minutes, now it takes like between 5 and 10 seconds, never more than 1 minute, so it's really, really nice. And because it was really, you launch the thing, you come back every 10 minutes, 20 minutes, you're not even sure it's there. Some other people already launched another one, and so you need to go down. I don't know. So and it was actually not that complex to do. We also added some things like extracting some basic metadata like the resource title when it is possible. So people then how it works, you just come to the Fair Enough thing, you choose a collection, which is a collection on multiple tests, and you provide a URL you want to evaluate, and you start the evaluation, and it will give you the result. Sometime, when if it extracted metadata. The score, so displaying the score is really basic. We didn't work much on it because, I mean, everyone can do a nice kind of pie charts, but we would like to maybe think in the future how to really make it user-friendly and keeping the extensible framework under it, but also making it user-friendly and understandable. And yeah, then you get also for each test the logs that are produced by the test, which is also, I will talk about challenge. Maybe I need to go faster on this. So we have a few challenges. So the first challenge is it can be complex to properly retrieve metadata for a specific URI because, I mean, this is also a big part of the world. All the discussion that are around FAIR right now is like, how do we retrieve metadata? How landing page are indicating where the metadata is and things like this. So currently, we have this process, but kind of everyone has the same process. Like you try to extract metadata from the HTML page, use HTTP request, doing content negotiations. Then you try also the signposting link to see if you can follow up and get things. And we use also an external metadata harvester service published by Mark also. So in case none of our local built-in thing works, we also try to hit his thing. But the problem, it can be a bit tricky. We already, we did a bit of work to try to help people to do it, but maybe, this is the kind of thing that either we'll need really a proper standardization to say to exactly how we need to implement those things, or we will just hack for life. Then also I think one of the big challenge also is the result of the clarity change with each test, because then also it depends on the developer motivation to just write the helpful error message. And everyone who builds software knows how critical error message can be. 1 minute? Okay, good. And so this a bit, the other things also that I added, but also other challenge we had is like some APIs use restrictive licenses like fair sharing, who prevent us to reuse easily the data. Otherwise, we need to put an image, and there are actually a whole client that has been written to try to overcome those things, but it's really, So in the end, we just don't use it. And we have also, I think it could be interesting also to talk about, to look into fair implementation profile, maybe also to try to tie it together and try to see how we can, tie together FIP. Basically, because you were talking about, I don't think you can really evaluate fairness with a human, a human is never gonna work. You need to kind of have the machine readable way of doing this. So I think that would be something really interesting, because at the moment people are just writing tests. They can provide the description and says everything and call it F2.1 or whatever, but then it's still not super structured. It starts to be a bit messy when we will have a lot of collections. So that's. Feel free, so if you want to try to build test APIs, normally, basically, you all just need to write one Python function. You fill in a few parameters, like in your fair points, and then you write one evaluation function that will check thing and say success or error. Thanks a lot.
So thank you. You have the last question for this session, actually.
How do you envision the future of this implementation, like more like a web service that is going to scale up, or more like a collection, a catalog that is collection of test results? Because as you can see that if you evaluate the same object 100 times, well, basically you're having, it's collecting the result 100 times. Going to be still a service, or it's going to be more like a catalog?
But then it's the two. It's a service that also keep. So every time, when we run an evaluation, we keep the result in the database, and then people can search it. And at the moment, this search is it's quite basic with data tables. We did not put a lot of work in having really a user experience that is smart. But I think if we want to, first we will need to, instead of asking people to all the time evaluate, they should first search for existing evaluation that fits. Is there an evaluation that fits my need? I mean, like that was like less than 1 month ago with this collection. And then if there is no up, let's launch an evaluation or things like this. And this is why also we have I built the GraphQL API so that we can ask those questions easily without like making fuss with like super complex post things that create. So yeah. Perfect.
So thank you. So before you jump up, I would like to thank all the speakers for sharing your work, sharing your results, but also raising questions and mention open things we have to solve actually. So we have a lunch break now. This I saw in the program that is over, so in the other locations, so in Naturales. Is there anybody who does not know where it is? Maybe arrived today? Nobody. So you find your way, have a nice lunch, get in contact and talk to each other. Thank you.